All right, so welcome. Today we are talking about how to spot fake news. So we're going to go through a few different topics. First, we're going to talk about why it's important, as well as what fake news is. Then we're going to delve into the different types of fake news and misinformation that can occur. And then from there, we're gonna dig into some more specific types of examples. And then we're going to dig into something that is called the CRAP test, funnily enough, which is a way to think through how credible the news sources you are looking at are. And then at the very end, I will leave you guys with some links and some resources to go to, as well as some actions you can take regarding fake news or misinformation online. All right, so first things first, let's go ahead and define fake news or misinformation. So it is false information, which is deliberately intended to mislead. It is not simply, information that you don't like or doesn't, you don't believe, it doesn't fit in with your beliefs. It's also not a mistake. There are, mistakes can happen in news reporting. Errors happen, but that is not fake news or information. That is a mistake. So fake news or misinformation is that deliberate intent to mislead. One thing with, fake news and misinformation online is that it does spread really quickly, and it can spread really quickly, and it can be hard to remedy once a piece of fake news or misinformation has taken hold. It can be really hard to remedy, and with our environment online, things can spread really quickly without having been confirmed. So rumors and misinformation and fake news can get spread really quickly. So why do we care? Why is talking about spotting fake news important? Well, it matters because you should have real facts and the truth to be able to make decisions. And you have the right to be able to find real information and to be able to trust news sources. You also, or you should be able to, I should say. And also, you don't want to damage your own credibility by spreading fake news or misinformation. Spreading truthful, credentialed information that we'll talk through, good practices to verify and vote, really builds up your credibility as a source of news information for your, the folks in your social circle, your family, your friends. So that's part of why it's important. And one more slide. Having misinformation can have real world effects. It really can, it can change people's behavior, and it can result in not good things going, if misinformation gets out there, it can really harm folks. And also and on the flip side, having real information, having, accurate information can help you make good decisions. So there's that give and take yin and yang of, misinformation can hurt, and real information, real news, trusted information can help. So that's why this matters. All right, so now we're getting into how does it work? We'll get into a little what it is, and how does it work. So I thought this cartoon was really fun, um, and I think really speaks to what can happen online. So it says, I've heard rhetoric from both sides, time to do my own research on the real truth. And then it's a picture of a web browser, a search engine, and it says literally the first link that agrees with what you already believe, completely supports your viewpoint without challenging it in any way. And then it goes back to the person, they say jackpot. So I thought that was pretty funny. But humor aside, that actually, I think that cartoon really displays this first reason I have listed for why do we fall for it, and that's confirmation bias. And a lot of these, concepts are actually rooted in psychology, and I will show you. Actually, the University of Michigan has a really nice link I can share with you that has kind of the psychological basis in research and psychology breakdown about why these are the case. But yes, the first one, confirmation bias. Humans naturally seek out information that confirms what they already think, believe, know. Another thing is folks can be in an echo chamber, and that results in them being in an ecosystem where the same type of information flows. Another one is repetition. If the same misinformation or the same fake news comes out time and again and time and again, it makes us think there must be something to it, or can. And then lastly on here, and I think these are two sides of the same coin. So both information overload and information avoidance. So on one hand, there's so much information available nowadays, it can be really hard and challenging to go through and really verify our sources. There's just so much. It's overwhelming. But on the other hand, and I think maybe in part because of that, it can be easy to avoid trying to track down other information. So I just want to quick show you guys, and like I said, I can share this link. Quick show you guys this page from the University of Michigan. Oh, I think I have to stop. Okay. So, yep. So, and you can see here, so it goes through the different psychological phenomena and cognitive biases. So like I said, I mentioned confirmation bias, and I think cognitive dissonances and bias assimilation are both part of those idea that, we take in what already fits with what we think and know. Yeah, and this is a really nice, and I think these are different ways of saying the concepts we went through in more academic mindset, but I'll share this link. I think this is a really nice kind of breaking it down, why that is. All right. So getting back to our presentation. Okay, so that's why it's important. That's how it happens. So let's get into what it is and the different types. I don't know about you, but I am someone who really appreciates a visual. So you can see here, and we'll go through all these different types. But you can see here there's lots of different ways. So there's everything from things that are parody, and this kind of puts it on a scale. But things that are parody that aren't intended or are intended to just poke fun. But if and I've had this happen before, of pausing for a second and being like, wait a minute, that's from a website I know is meant for parody, but can be misinterpreted. And then we go all the way to from that, so things that are intended as parody are intended not to be taken seriously, all the way on the other side to things that are fabricated or manipulated and are really intended to deceive. And in the middle there, you can see we have, things that are maybe misleading, a false conclusion or connection that is given. Also, false context, when the whole story isn't told. And also imposters. Yeah, so that's kind of our whole scale of different types of misinformation. So we'll get into each of them in a little more detail. Yes, so on the one hand, as I mentioned, there is just straight up, this is intended to deceive, this is intended to manipulate. It oftentimes, you can usually see that it has a very, the headline is designed to get a reaction. It's designed to want you to click on it, and that's why they're often known as clickbait. And also oftentimes it doesn't come with an author, so you have no way of knowing who wrote it. But this is like I said, this is the one side of the scale where it is, really intended to mislead or deceive you. On the next level is things with a lack of context or things that have been manipulated. So certain key elements are omitted so that the narrative of a story comes out a certain way. There could also be manipulated or Photoshop pictures. Whoa, excuse me. Pictures so that it doesn't seem or to make something seem like it happened a certain way when maybe it didn't. So these are all things that may not be straight up lies or deception, but are being manipulated such to present a story a certain way. So there's that. And more specifically, so not only are there things where they're manipulated, but then there are, there's information that is biased and, may seem like it's telling a story, but will really only tell half a story. So maybe they're, omitting, might be real information, it might be a real perspective on an issue, but it is omitting another perspective. So it might, it might be giving you one complete side, and it might not be, but it might not be painting that whole picture. All right. And then, as I mentioned, kind of on the most, at least intended not to create fake news, but it can, are those satire. So they are, intended to be humorous, intended to be a joke, intended not to be taken seriously. But sometimes, if you don't know, that's where that's coming from, or that's what that particular organization or column is known for, you can take a look at that headline and think, wait a minute, huh? And it can deceive you that way if it's not immediately clear that it is satire. So now that we've gone through the different types of fake news, we'll get some examples of what those look like. So as we started with in our types of fake news, so those straight up misinformation, as I mentioned, they are frequently without an author. They will be from a strange website. There'll be those clickbait headlines that I mentioned. And it'll also be things that can easily be disproven by a well-known source. As well, it can potentially be from a not well-known source. So if you look at the name of that source and it's not something that you've heard much of, or even if like searching for it doesn't yield many results, that can be a sign too. All right. So for fake news that is intended to mislead, it can often use manipulated images or statistics that the way those statistics are presented or the visual component can mislead you. So this example on the right here, you can see uses the same data, but the way it's presented, because of the different scales, it makes it look on the left like the Yankees have a much higher win percentage than the Boston Red Sox. But the way it's presented on the right with what's called an interval scale, it makes it clear that actually that percentage is pretty close. So you can see how using those two different types of scales made the data look, or kind of misled you with what the data said. The same can be very true with maps. Maps can be particularly easy to manipulate. So if you take a look at the two maps I have for you on the right, these are both census maps. They're from the same data set. Folks living in poverty or below the poverty line in the United States in 2000. This is from the same data set from the 2000 census. The top one has been standardized by population percentage by county. The other is raw numbers by county. So you can see here how that top graph paints a much different picture than that bottom graph. And in fact, Los Angeles County, which is what I believe that county that is highlighted very dark, and as well you can see, I think somewhat to Chicago, which you can see here on Lake Michigan, based on percentage, their what color they are changes because that percentage is different than the raw number. So that's another way that that data can be manipulated to give you one perspective. So along with that, there can be news stories that only present part of that story, or draw false conclusion. So an example would be like a politician saying, "I love mustard," and the news report saying politician hates ketchup. So that's that, taking things out of context that we discussed earlier, and really only presenting information one way. So satirical. So I would say the two main names to know in satirical information would be the Onion and the New Yorker's Borowitz report. So if you're seeing something is coming from the Onion or something is coming from the Borowitz report, it is satire, and it is known to be fake. It is meant to be humorous. And so I know I certainly personally have gotten caught and had to look and been like, wait a minute, this is from the Onion. Okay. So that is another, two names to know when checking if something is satirical. So some other definitions so we went through kind of one definition of fake news. Some other ones are fake, false, or regularly misleading websites that are shared on Facebook and social media. Some of these websites may rely on outrage by using distorted headlines and decontextual or dubious information in order to generate likes, shares, or profit. So that's that kind of that category we talked about like deliberate misinformation. Another category, websites circulate misleading or potentially unreliable information. Another one, websites use clickbait headlines and social media descriptions. So even if the story is, measured, sometimes they will summarize it or give it a headline in such a way that kind of misleads. So similar to that, like painting only one side of the story. Yep, and then the last one, as we just talked about, satire comedy sites, which can offer important commentary on politics and society, but can be shared as actual literal news. So that's one where you kind of have to know oh, this is a satire. Okay, so here are some other things, some other definitions. So the rumor mill, so sources that traffic in rumors, gossip, innuendo, and unverified claims. Junk science, so sources that promote pseudoscience, metaphysics, naturalistic fallacies, and scientifically dubious claims. And then clickbait, so it's a link or a title that's designed to drive traffic to sources that can provide credible content but use exaggerated, misleading, or questionable headlines, social media descriptions, or images. So they're emphasizing a really a part of the story out of context in order to drive interest in it. All right, so some rules for misinformation or fake news. So it can't be verified. It often appeals to emotion. It wants you to not think about it. It wants you to just go to an emotional state. Authors behind it usually aren't experts. In fact, it also can't be found anywhere else. Chances are, if that's only the one place you're seeing the story, chances are that makes it more likely it is fake news or false information. It also often comes from fake websites. And it kind of tying in with it appeals to emotion and is often subjective, not objective. So one other way this happens is ads can be designed as stories. And this oftentimes happens on either the side of a website or the bottom of a website of credible news sources. It will link to something that looks like it's another story, but is actually an ad. And you'll want to look out. It can be really subtle what it looks like. So here you can see in this example, it says sponsored headlines. And it looks like it's just more stories, but in fact, these are all ads. Or sponsor headlines, again. Here's another one that was on Sidebar. So it looks like it is a news story about something, but it is in fact sponsored content. It is in fact an ad. All right, so now that we've gone through what it is, we're going to go through in more detail how to spot a fake news. So here's a nice infographic, and we'll go through these in a little more detail. But yep, so step one, what is the source's information? What is their mission? Does it have contact information? And along with that, who is the author of this information? Or do they have credibility? Are they real? Another thing that can happen, check the date of the story. It might mean that it's no longer relevant. It might mean it might be out of date or old. You also want to check your own biases and see, is that impacting your judgment about this story? Another at the top, going back up to the top here, another thing when we've mentioned clickbait headlines. So sometimes reading the whole article, you'll realize, oh, that headline, maybe the article is balanced and measured, but and tells a whole story, but maybe the headline doesn't. Maybe the headline was designed to get clicks, and reading the whole story, you come away with a broader perspective. Another strategy is to look at, if there are links in the story, if there are sources in the story, check those out. Does that actually track with what the story's saying? Again, we mentioned, there can be satire sites that can be taken as news. So you want to check particularly those Onions and Borowitz reports. Double check, is this a known source of satire? And then finally, ask, You're always welcome to, ask us librarians. You can also consult some fact-checking websites. I'll have some names for those for you at the end. So that's also an option. All right. So how to check fake news. So we talked, we mentioned this. But yeah, when you want to check the credentials of the organization that has put out this story and the author. So you can do a quick Google search. You can see, do they have a website? Do they have a biography? What is their background? What gives them authority in this subject? Same thing for an organization. You can go to an About Us on their website and see, what is their mission. And you can also, again, do a quick Google search, see if you can find any sources talking about their credibility or authority to talk about a subject. Yeah, look for bias. So, and this can be the article's biased, you're biased. So look for points at which you could be biased or the author could be biased. Again, check the dates. Is this an old article? Is this up to date? And as I mentioned, check the organization it's from. And there can certainly be cases where something can sound really official, but it can turn out to be a biased organization. One other strategy is to look at the URL. So oftentimes, these websites will use URLs that are just slightly different from a credible URL. So that is that bar up at the top. So take a look at that. Make sure that URL looks legitimate. So another way to check is to look into who owns a website or organization and what their interests might be. And as we mentioned, if something is written in a way that is really inflammatory and is really designed to get a reaction, it's important to be skeptical because it could be doing that for the purpose of getting you so emotional you can't see through. And again, if something sounds too good to be true, too weird, too reactionary, it probably is. All right, so I mentioned it at the beginning, but we are finally here, the CRAP test. So CRAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And this was developed by librarians at CSU Chico, so thank you to them. And we'll go through. Here's a nice little chart. I'll link in our YouTube. So these are some really good questions to ask yourself. So currency. So again, is this new information? Has this information been revised or updated? How relevant is this information? What authority does the source of the information have? And going in there with these questions, some things we've already talked about. So looking at that URL, looking at the author's credentials, looking at the organization it comes from. Accuracy. So can you find this information somewhere else? Are they giving evidence to support this information? How, are there spelling, grammar, typos? How reliable does it seem to even be that way? And then finally, the purpose. So what are these authors trying to do? Are they clear about what they're trying to do? Do you see biases within the work? And that kind of goes into, seeing those things that are satire. Like, is the Is the purpose of this to be humor? So things like that. So this is a really good worksheet to think through when you're trying to determine if something is fake news or not. All right. So this is an example of why, you want to use all, go through all of these facets. So there's an example of, students were given 3 articles about immigration policy. One of those articles was published by an organization that the Southern Poverty Law Center characterizes as a hate group. And so even though this author had credentials, if students had just relied on that information within that page itself, they might think it was the most credible of these articles, not knowing the context that the organization that published it is characterized as a hate group. So that's why it's important to take a look at that whole picture. All right. So these are, so the first question always ask yourself is who is the creator of this content? And is that information easily accessible? Check information about the organization, check the URL to make sure it's not one of those URLs that are slightly misspelled. And information from addresses with .gov, .edu, .mil, .org can be more credible than ones that end in .com or .net. Search for the internet for more info about the author, and see what they've published, see what their expertise is. So question 2. So once you've looked through the author, what is the message? So is this, what is the content? Is this information that you can find elsewhere? When is this information from? Where are they getting the information in this article? Are they disclosing their sources and the expertise of their sources? Are there quotes from sources that have credibility? And then, is there bias? Does there seem to be slant? Is, described factually, or is there a lot of opinions? And then question 3, why was this created? So can you tell what purpose this news article was written for? Is it from a for-profit news article? So as we mentioned, a lot of those clickbait headlines and websites that create fake news stories are designed to be driven by advertisements. So they're created to make a profit. And as we mentioned, there are oftentimes the news articles at the bottom of a page, there are things that look like news article links but are actually ads. And then again, you want to watch out for that phrase, sponsored content, because that means that they're paying to display this content. All right, so what can you do to help stop fake news and to determine what is, well, I guess first of all, to determine what is fake news. So first thing you got to think through, can you trust this author and source? Can you find this information elsewhere? Is this an ad? Is it satire? Do you have a way to fact check this? Is the story or even headline sensationalizing? Is it biased? Is there part of the story not included? So what is our role here? So first things, what can you do to help stop fake news? Because as we mentioned in the beginning, it is important, and people can make decisions based on, we want people to be able to make good decisions based on good, reliable information. So first things first is don't share any information, and let the person, if you saw it shared somewhere, let them know, let the person who shared know that this news is fake. Also, there are, social media sites have mechanisms for you to report that a piece of news is fake. So look for that report feature. All right, and here are some good resources for digging into um, you know, if a story is fake or not, or getting information about a fake news article. So that includes factcheck.org, Snoops, PolitiFact, the Center for Media Literacy, the Media Literacy Now, the National Association for Media Literacy Education, the News Literacy Project, and the Poynter Institute, which is the sponsor of PolitiFact. They're the host of PolitiFact. So these are all really good resources for finding if something is fake news and finding more information behind it. All right, so again, just reviewing, practices to combat it. So don't share the information, report it if you see it. Think critically as you're reading news stories. Verify the source and author before you share something, and read beyond the headline, especially if it looks like clickbait. Like we mentioned, those clickbait headlines are really designed to get a reaction. So, thank you for joining us today. So we've gone through, why understanding what fake news is important, the different types of fake news, how to spot it, some resources, and some practices to combat it. So thank you, and feel free, as always, if you have questions, we are always happy to help. So always feel free to stop by or give us a call if you have questions.